All right, so back on the bench, I've got the canopy frame and the skin just laying here on the bench. And these are the things that I've noticed that I've fixed already before I got into anything else. First thing was you have to be able to pull, if you can ignore the clecos for a moment, you need to make sure that this hinge assembly, this hinge support here, it has these flanges on it. Those flanges need to be fitted up against this face of this channel. There can't be any gap in here. Initially, there was quite a big gap just because these channels were a little bit twisted and there was some interference down in this corner, which I'll talk about in a minute. But you want to make sure that the flange of this hinge assembly is able to be drawn up nice and flat against the channel. You've got two of these on each hinge, so there's a left and a right. You can see this one fits pretty good. Hopefully, I know it's dark. This one is probably even worse. But you can see that they fit nice in here. Of course, that's just held on with clecos. When it's riveted, when it's prepped and riveted, that will probably close up even tighter. But that's what you want. You want to make sure that those are nice and tight against the channel face. Now, in order to do that, what I had to do, you can see, hopefully, I know the lighting blows, and I'll show this again when I take this skin off of the frame, I'll show you from the other side what I'm talking about. But I could not get my flanges to fit nice against the face of the channel because this corner of this piece was protruding out too much, and the corner of this piece was hitting the channel, and it wouldn't allow me to draw in the flange. So I had to take the skin off, and I had to file this corner across the width of the hinge, this flat piece here where it comes up into this corner, that needed to be filed back to allow these flanges to fit right. That was the first thing one of the first things that I had done was got that all cleaned up on both hinges so I can get this flange drawn nicely against the face of the channel. The other thing that I had done was back here. Again, this piece is welded to the tube. It's welded here. As you can see, let me switch hands, sorry about that. You can see where it's welded here. And it's also welded on the other side. And that weld on the other side was interfering with the skin. It was a little bit of a heavier bead. And it was not allowing the skin to lay nicely on the tube. It was holding the skin up off of the tube. So on both hinges, I had to grind down that weld a little bit to get the skin to lay nice. Those are the big deals before you start to fit this to the fuselage. You don't need to worry about drilling holes between this and putting clecos in, but you want to be able to draw them together. That's critical because that affects the gap between this edge of this skin and the edge of the skin that's already on the airplane. Now the instructions have you draw a line on this tube on the other side, and then you sight through the existing holes. Let me see if I can flip this around one-handed here. You draw a center line down the center of that tube, and then you find that center line through these holes, and you match drill these holes to that. I don't want to do that yet because, like I said, I needed to get these hinges drawn up tight against here. Now there's a little bit of flexibility with this if you don't have this riveted. You've got some flexibility on it to make adjustments if you need to when you're fitting it to the airframe. So that's all I've done so far. I've cleaned up the hinges like I just talked about with the welds and getting the flanges to fit. And I've only clecoed the pre-drilled holes that match the skin to the frame. I haven't drilled any new holes. You can see I've got a couple of clecos missing here. That's at each hinge point just because those interfere a little bit with the hinge itself. And I didn't want that to be a factor while I'm fitting the frame to the fuselage. So those clecos I left out for now. But that's it. Get these cleaned up, get everything to fit correctly, cleco it together. That's all I've done so far. Back here on the airplane itself, like I talked about, the other thing that I had done, protection with the tape to protect your aluminum. And then I had chamfered this edge right here of the block. I put a chamfer on it. And then I did the same thing on this other heavy block right here. I put a chamfer on it down this edge here. And that allowed those hooks to slide in a little bit better. And then I just talked about on the spacer piece here, I had shaved this spacer back a little bit more than a 1/16-ish, just so that hook can go forward a little bit better. So that's basically all that I've done so far. So now I'm going to bring that assembly back over here. I'm going to put it on the airplane. I'm going to run those hooks forward as far as they'll go until they hit this spacer block and make sure that they're pushed down tight against here. And I'm going to see how that skin lays on these flanges. I'm going to start working these flanges to get that skin to lay as nice as I can. When I get to that point and things are looking pretty good, I'll put this skin back on and I'll see how the two look together. All right, so let me hop on that and we'll see what happens. All right, so back on the airplane, I had taken a little bit of tape and I had basically laid the tape on this flange here and just very slightly overlapping each one of these tabs just to cover this gap. Because again, whenever you sand, at least for me personally, I don't want all that sanding material and grit getting down into these creases where I pretty much can never get it back out. So I just taped this off to cover up this gap before I did any sanding. After I had this taped, I used a file and I just cleaned up the back half, not this edge, this back edge of these flanges. So now this feels a little bit better. These corners don't stick up as much and it just feels a little bit nicer all the way around on these curved areas here. So you can see I just filed the back edge, the back flat surface of these flanges. I didn't do anything on this top because I noticed when I had these two pieces fitted across this flat area here, the fit was really nice. So I haven't really screwed with that too much. The other thing that I had done, again, just looking at the flanges, trying to bring flanges up even with one another between these two and between these two, these three, these two, and these two, just manipulating them a little bit, trying to get them to sit a little nicer between each one. And again, I had this all taped off and I did some filing across the back of these flanges here just to try to smooth this out a little bit and get this to look and feel a little bit better. The other thing that I had to do was this piece. This is the small aluminum angle that gets riveted on for your weather stripping to attach to. but the end of this was hanging down too low, and it was interfering with this part of the fuselage, so I had to cut that short. The other thing that I noticed was this part here of this flange was protruding out this way, and as the skin came down, it was kind of sticking out. So I filed that back a little bit, and I also filed the end of this flange a little bit, because this was also just kind of, everything in this corner here was just kind of protruding this way, and it wasn't allowing the skin to sit nice here. It was holding it out too much. I did that on both sides. Over here as well. I didn't have to cut this. I didn't have to cut this piece shorter, but I did clean this up in here because the skin was coming down and sticking out. So this whole area in here I cleaned up quite a bit. So now that I've got that done, and like I said, I've got the chamfers on the nylon blocks here done, I'm going to go ahead and put this back together temporarily. The other thing to look at when this skin is off, well, it doesn't matter if the skin is on or not, but when you are doing your initial fit of the canopy frame, when you have that fitted on here, look up underneath it and make sure that the hooks that fit into here, make sure that they are not interfering with this notch here. This notch right here. Sometimes when you have the hooks in and you're moving stuff around, they'll rub on this notch, and you may have to lower the notch a little bit. You may have to make it a little bit wider so there's no interference. A lot of times when this skin or this framing of the canopy won't sit down all the way, it seems to be riding up here. A lot of times it will be because that hook is resting right here, and you just need to drop this notch down a little bit so that will sink and it will rest. The skin will sit on these flanges. So when you have that framing in here initially, check to make sure that this is not interfering. Put your chamfers on here, clean up these edges, clean up anything you need to clean up in here. I've done that. I've trimmed back these aluminum spacers so the hooks can recess a little bit deeper. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm sure I'll have to take it back off, but I'm going to go ahead and put this skin back on, and I'm going to put my frame on and see how they look together.